Now, I hate to admit it, but I think we're already at work in holiday mode because the office is closed today, which means, of course, while the cat's away, the rats will play. Although we do have a number of cats we still have living in the neighborhood, and some of them are adoptable. We'll just point that out. That'll be a subject for another day. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Coming up on, well, I'll just say it's a little after 7 minutes after 8 o'clock. It's 64, on our way to about 90 again today. And maybe not quite as hot this weekend. No one's going to complain about that if we're just in the mid to upper 80s. I think that that's pleasant. Last night when the Thunderboomer rolled through, now I did not expect that. I looked at the weather radar about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and there had been some storms up to our north, probably in that area around Haley and Bellevue and in Fairfield, but it didn't seem like it was headed this way. And then I looked, and there was some storms down around Jackpot, but there was a gap in the middle, and I thought, aha, this is going to move on. We're going to escape this. So I stayed up late anyway, watching baseball last night. I've got to make a quick mention. My team won again, and my favorite player on that ball club hit a grand slam home run, and then came up in the following inning and went to the opposite side of the plate batting and hit a 3-run home run. So good night for me, at least. And I got off to bed finally about an hour and a half later than I normally would go to bed. And it wasn't long after that I heard the rolling thunder, and I thought, aha, I have a sunroof open out in the parking lot. So I raced outside, closed the sunroof, came back inside, and then finally managed to get to bed. So I am probably up to my old tricks today. That is, somewhere in the middle of the program, I'll take a short nap. If I do, you'll wake me up, right? You'll scream as loudly as you can at the radio telling me that it's time to get back on track. Speaking of people who are screaming, there are a lot of traditionalists in this country who are unhappy about one of the latest moves made. Yesterday, the defense secretary, a fellow by the name of Carter, he made an announcement. Now, this will not take place as long as Barack Obama is president, because maybe they're worried about a coup. The officers aren't terribly happy about it. But they say it will happen after Obama leaves the White House. Now, his successor could change that. But they're going to allow transgendered people in the military. Now, that would mean guys who think they're women, in the middle of a battle. Can you imagine somebody standing up saying, I've always thought that perhaps I was more of a woman than a man, and I just would like everybody here to start calling me Winifred instead of William. Is that okay with all of you? Sit down, we're being shot at. Now, this is, I'm sorry, but this has gotten to the point. It is, you would have thought 20 years ago you were reading something, a comedy sketch, when you'd come across something like this. And I just don't know how you maintain readiness in the military with all of the changes that have been made. And don't they have better priorities? I bring this up because last night I didn't see this on a live broadcast because, as I say, I was watching baseball last night. But Dr. Charles Krauthammer, appearing on a special report with Brett Baer on Fox News, was asked what he thought about this. And if I could, I wanted to share with you. Now, I find it interesting that he says he's not necessarily opposed to it, but he does believe that there are bigger priorities.
The job of the Pentagon is to fight wars and keep us safe. You're getting the impression that in the middle of wartime, and this is wartime, the Pentagon is entirely devoted to social experimentation and social work. I have no objection to the change in policy in and of itself, but is this what the Pentagon should be working on at a time when the policy ought to be to direct the armed forces and the training to win a war that is killing people everywhere from Orlando to Ankara? I just think the priorities are completely out of whack.
And the war has come home. It's not just Orlando. It's Chattanooga, Tennessee. It's San Bernardino, California, and here we are saying, well, first of all, we need to ensure that we have the right dresses for some of the troops who aren't sure what they are. I just I saw a movie the other day, just briefly. I was flipping through the TV dial, and it was called Starship Troopers. And I watched about 2 minutes of it. And there's a shower scene where all of the troopers are showering, but it's a gang shower, for lack of a better word or words. It's all the men and women showering at the same time, and none of them seem to have an interest in each other. which I think is partly what the liberals are up here too. It's partly based on population control, and if they can take away your sexuality altogether and call you an androgen, and then perhaps feed you enough saltpeter while you're in the military, no one will show any interest in anyone else. And then when you get out, if they could just keep that regimen up, no one will have any children, and will decrease the surplus population, or what they call over at oh, was it? I've forgotten the name of it. Well, Bohemian Grove, or one of those get-togethers, the useless eaters that we have. 12 minutes now after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Wes Pruden, the former editor of the Washington Times, still writes a column for that newspaper. A workable alternative to synthetic soldiers is what it's called, the latest. To halt the lame, the sick, and even the healthy. Let me just start that all over again in a moment. He's describing who we could now allow in the military. The halt, the lame, the sick, and even the healthy elderly are still barred from the nation's wars. Inability to perform basic physical tests has been declared no bar to women in combat, so why should a 90-year-old man on a walker or even a 30-year-old woman on crutches be told that he and she cannot serve? He says the defense secretary invites transgendered recruits into the services because, quote, it's the right thing to do, unquote. Well, that's not fact. That's a subjective opinion. I mean, that's just how liberals feel about it. When you see this in newspaper editorials all the time, when they were arguing that Johnny and Jimmy should get married, and then when they argue that people should be able to marry horses, cows, and pigs, they always say it's the right thing to do. According to whom? Who appointed you high priest? You know, I don't know where you get your morals from, but they're not a match to mine or a great many other, well, tens of millions of Americans, I would still presume. And probably even many more than that, but they're so cowed by your screams of racist, bigot, homophobe that they don't dare open their mouths. Senior officers of the military services, he writes, who know better than to try to make fighters out of men who can't decide which toilet to use are not happy. But what do they know, according to the government? The generals and admirals want more time to study how to put the new freedom to pee anywhere in practice. Their objections are no doubt a stall in hopes that a smarter president will arrive in time to save the proud, the few, and the unamused. Wesley Pruden writing at the Washington Times today. And it just, folks, the world has been turned upside down. And this Orwellian system that says, that the ocean is now the sky and the sky is now the ocean. They may tell you that, but that doesn't make it so. And the argument that these people have always served in the military, well, it may be true. I had a friend who told me about some blanket parties they used to have when he was in basic training, and a lot of those guys ended up washing out, I suppose, because of that. But no one's saying that that's right by any means. But the military used to police itself in that sense. I'm telling you right now that this is going to harm readiness. And this shows you we are in the midst of a war for world domination. And all the Obama White House and his minions can talk about are putting people in skirts out on the battlefield. Hello? Doesn't that disturb anyone else? It's 8:15. Telephone number to reach our program today, 736-0300. That's 736-0300. They may have always served, but they kept their business to themselves. And this notion that, hey, look over here. I think I'm a woman. Look at me. Look at me. Try that on the battlefield. And then they say, we don't understand why the terrorists hate us so much. Well, I don't know. We spread our culture all over the world through Hollywood and our TV programs and video games and the like. And they also see our culture, which aborts little babies in their mother's wombs and puts our soldiers into dresses and our women into combat, and they've got to be scratching their heads saying there's something wrong with these Westerners. And you know what? They'd be right. We have a caller with us. You're up next. You're on the air on KLIX.
Good morning, Bill. I don't know if there's a show on Monday nights. It's called Brain Dead, and it's a parody on how stupid the people in Washington's elected officials are. You need to watch it because it's so true. It's funny, but it's sad. It just makes fun of how removed they are from us and just how stupid they think we are. And just give it a look. See, it's going to be a cult following, I think, because at least it's a step in the right direction. They're showing and making fun of them elite buggers, and that's a I get a little excited talking about it. But if anybody out there wants to look Monday night, thank you, bud.
Hey, thank you for the call. I think I'll have to check that one out. That's like the TV show Portlandia. I had someone tell me a couple of weeks ago, they said that show is spot on. If that's the case, I'm not traveling to Oregon anytime soon. You're next. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Yes. One thing that gets me about all this stuff is that they're talking about open-mindedness, that they're the most oppressive people I've ever seen. I think that we should come up with a new term, love Nazis. I think that would fit in most appropriately, don't you agree?
Somebody out there would object, though, and then they'd have to take that into consideration and have hearings, and that would last for several years, and I don't know.
Thank you.
Thank you for the call. We've just, as I say, we've completely lost our way. There was a fellow who's quoted yesterday at Christian Post saying the end's got to be near. Actually, N. Graham said the same thing a couple of days ago, too, during a radio interview. And people say, well, Bill, the end's already coming. Well, that's fine. You can believe whatever you believe. I don't. I see what's going on right now, and to me, this is a sign of the end. Now, does the end come tomorrow? I don't know. Does it come 100 years from now? I don't know. But Rome came to an end as well, and Rome came to an end because of these same silly little ridiculous, we're a return to pagans or paganism. And that was the downfall of the Roman Empire in that sense. Even though they had officially adopted Christianity, they opened the floodgates too, and they allowed in all sorts of people who were not Romans and pagans and the like to come into their countries, and they brought all of those customs and practices along, and they diluted the culture. They diluted the military. They diluted the government. And as the caller mentioned, this TV show about showing us how just stupidly government is run. Well, in Rome, near the end, there was just a succession of really bad rulers, and they were all addle-brained. Coming up on a break in a moment. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. It's almost 20 after. Now, just after the 8:30 break, we're going to be joined by Jack Johnson. He's going to step into the studio with us. And while he is known as the undersheriff in Jerome County, he is here in an unofficial capacity today. And today is also the day that we now have no permits required for concealed carry in Idaho. I read somewhere where somebody said they actually walked outside this morning with concealed carry just to do it and then walk back inside their house. But we're talking about the need to get people trained. And maybe one way to do that is to build a new range right in the center somewhere of Twin Falls County. He's got some thoughts on that coming up in a few minutes. In the meantime, it's 66, 20 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. The show is known as Top Story. I just had an email text message from a friend. I guess what's the difference? It's a message that came via electronic communication. But he says, how did these people end up passing the psycho exam in the first place? Do they still give any of those? You remember the generation that's behind this was looking to destroy the military anyway, going all the way back to the 1960s. You could question what their motivation really happens to be. Thank you for listening this morning. This is Top Story with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And I wanted to mention our friends that if you're having difficulty hearing us, we should mention that you need to give a call to Dr. Christine Pickup, a doctor of audiology in Rupert. She's at Mount Harrison Audiology, and she's the only locally owned hearing center right now in southern Idaho. She reminds you, if you're like most people, you're used to thinking of hearing as something that likely takes place between your ears, but remember, it's the brain that actually does the interpretation. It's where sound becomes the detail. Your brain has to work hard to make it happen, and when the sound signals from your ears happen to be compromised, your brain has to work even harder to fill everything in. And that extra effort does take a toll. That's energy that could be used somewhere else. Don't let your brain down. Take care of your hearing with the help of Mount Harrison Audiology. The office telephone number is 208-312-0957. Over at this is from the Daily Signal. Over at the Daily Signal, Roger Severino says, this change in the military was not precipitated by needs, but by political correctness. After all, the military is not stretched so thin that it must make special accommodation to help attract the estimated 0.5% of Americans who self-identify as transgender in order to effectively fight and win our wars. In grappling with this issue, it helps to ask why the military has separate shower facilities and barracks for women and men in the first place. As with the question of women in combat, if the answer has something to do with biological realities, privacy, and interactions between the sexes, then the implications for morale and readiness are fairly evident. Now, when they decided to open the door and have they eliminated the don't ask, don't tell, and they said that you could be openly gay and be in the military. There have been people who've been serving in the military all the way since our Revolutionary War who have that particular persuasion. So I'm not sitting here saying there's anything bad about those people. I'll reserve my judgment for another day on that. But and I have a lot of friends who are in that community too. And again, I can't begin to understand it. But I'm not going to belittle them and badger them about it. There are probably some things that I do that annoy the heck out of them. I like talk about it. But the fact of the matter is that they're not doing it openly. When they come off ships, they stop and kiss their significant other, and I don't know. I just don't know how that sets well with a lot of other people who are still a little queasy about that. If you'd like to do that, can't you do it somewhere else? Number one. Number two, one of the arguments I remember hearing made at the time was, well, Bill, the Israelis do it. Well, think about that for a moment. You know that Israel at one point is only 18 miles wide, and it's surrounded by enemies other than the Mediterranean Sea, which also is a good route for enemies to come in and land on the shores and try to do all sorts of mayhem. So they really need everybody in Israel as part of the military. You reach a certain age, everybody has to do military duty. It's the only way they can survive in that part of the world. We're not faced with those challenges, at least not yet. And so to make those arguments, it's like comparing apples and oranges in these situations. Yes, Bill, but if people want to serve their country, they should be able to serve their country. Well, okay, hold on a minute today. Where is all of this as a constitutional right? Do you have a right to serve your country? We'd like you to serve your country, but you have a right to do it. We keep doing all of these things that no one has actually found a specific delineated right in the Constitution. We keep doing all of these things, and you're left scratching your head. By the way, it's not just the U.S. military. Headline also in the Daily Signal today, LGBT groups seek to entrench agenda at the United Nations. The UN recently created the UN Free and Equal Campaign, which has been the epicenter of the bureaucratic efforts to promote and institutionalize the LGBT agenda. Should this project gain more official status on the level of UN Women, for example, its influence and resources would pose an even greater threat to the interests of the family, the institution of marriage, and religious liberty. They're going to go badger the Saudi Arabians, right? You people really need to change your ways. You keep throwing these folks off the top of roofs and chopping their heads off. You can't do that any longer. And what are the Saudis going to say? Well, it won't be very pretty, I can assure you of that. The writer says, as it is, the Free and Equal campaign has undertaken a variety of high-profile projects, including slickly produced videos, reports, and aggressive PR campaigns, such as the creation of LGBT-themed postage stamps. Sticky on both sides and maybe on the edges too. This week, you can go down to the post office and for 49 cents, get a beautiful stamp of the lovely Bruce Lynn Jenner. And it can run really fast. Your mail will get there in about half the time it would anywhere else. Oh, I'm sorry. I couldn't help that one. We've got 8:30. My clipboard is taking an abusive beating this morning. It's likely going to file some sort of workplace violence complaint. Jack Johnson scheduled to join us in a few minutes. Today is a big day in Idaho. This is the first day, officially, where you do not need a permit. We have open and concealed carry now in the state of Idaho, and you can do that without anyone locking you up and tossing away the key. But yet, there's also a need to get people trained if they plan to do all of this carrying. If you're a first-timer and you're thinking, all right, I'm going to do that, think about actually learning how to do it first. We've got details on that coming up in just a few minutes. It's 67. Bill Colley with you on Top Story.